Hey, everybody. Welcome to Battleground Podcast. This week is a very special and patriotic week. Obviously, the 4th of July was yesterday. I'm hoping that you're still in a patriotic mood. And this week, we have a very, very special guest. It's a guy that I served with named Robert Pinholt. Rob was one of my soldiers in Outlaw Platoon. I voluntold him to be my radio telephone operator, which means that he managed all of my radios. And he was basically with me everywhere I went in Afghanistan, whether it was in my truck or in the midst of a firefight. Rob was always there. So he has, I think, a very unique perspective as to what happened on that 16-month hellish combat deployment. But Rob is a fairly incredible guy. You know, he rose to be a leader in Outlaw Platoon. He's somebody that I still consider a dear friend today. And Rob is still, surprisingly, which is the case with so many of the men and women who serve this country in uniform in combat, Rob is still serving his community and his country in so many awesome ways, and we're going to get into it. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to our Rumble channel, subscribe there for the video version of this podcast, which is posted every Wednesday at the exact same time the audio version is. Leave reviews and comment on social media, and comment on all the posts, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or on the Rumble channel. That all helps us with all this algorithm stuff that I don't really understand anyway. So please do that. Subscribe to Battleground Podcast. It helps us a lot. This show is for you. And we're just trying to improve every single week. Without further ado, I want to introduce my good friend and former soldier, Rob Pinholt, to the show. Rob, thank you for coming on. How's it going, brother?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on, Sean. I appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with you.
Oh, well, me too. And we've had many, many, many discussions. I feel like you and I have talked about so many things where we're just spending hour upon hour upon hour together in our truck or laying in an observation post in eastern Afghanistan. We talked about a lot of things. But the first thing I want to jump right into is, after September 11th, you joined the military, Rob. So, I joined the military because of September 11th as well. Really, and I say this often, I don't come from a legacy military family with every generation serving, or a father or grandfather who served. It was 9/11 that was the catalyst for me. And I don't know how that played into your decision, Rob, but what I find remarkable about you and so many of the men and women who served after 9/11 is that you had to know you were going to war when you volunteered to serve, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. In 9/11, I was a junior in high school, I think. And so, it's like the rest of us, just kind of, you have to figure it out, what's going on as it occurs. And it was a very surreal event. And for me, a senior in high school, that was about when we invaded Iraq. And, it was 2003. And so me and my buddies watching on the news, they had live feed of guys fighting over there. And when you turn 18, you have to register for selective service. And so you register and think, okay, well, these guys that are fighting, they're no different from us. They're about the same age. And so you do that kind of comparison thing where you're thinking, why are they there? Why am I here? And for me, it felt like something it was a duty to me.
So you were in 11th grade when September 11th happened?
Yeah, 11th grade or 10th grade. Maybe it was 10th grade, 2001.
So yeah. What were you doing? Do you tell me exactly where you were and what you were doing in that moment, because something tells me that you remember it vividly.
Yeah, I do. I had just gotten to school because it was 10 something. I think I might have had a off period, the first period, something like that. And so when I got to school, they had TVs on and everybody was gathered around watching. And it was just, I think one of the towers had a plane strike it, and not the other one yet. And so it looked like it was some kind of an accident, maybe. And obviously that it turned out to not be an accident at all. And everybody was just transfixed to the TV and just kind of watching it unfold. And, I think everybody had different things going through their minds, and for me, certainly anger was one of them, and you never knew where it was going to stop, because it was this attack and then that attack and then the Pentagon, and then who knew where it was going to stop.
It's so crazy that you say that, because I remember that as well. We thought, especially thinking back to that day and what it was like to live through that, we thought that it was just the beginning or opening salvo of what was a much larger attack,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, there's a lot of ramifications that come with that. At the time, it had been a while. It's been since the Gulf War, really, that we were in a lot of open conflict. I think we had engagements in Somalia and Bosnia and so forth, but that level of conflict was something that was relatively foreign to most of us. I was pretty young in the Gulf War. So we were just I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And by and large, that was a time of peace in this country. And it was like a couple days before September 11th, where I was sitting down talking with all of my college roommates, who were all great guys, about how we didn't really have a moment in our upbringing that really drove us to serve anything greater than ourselves. And so we had thrown ourselves into sports or team sports and committing to a team, because that's similar. But there's nothing quite like serving in the military, and we just didn't have anything like that to rally around. And then, no joke, Rob, 2 days later, September 11th happens. And, like you, my focus was, how can I get in the fight as soon as possible? But for you, when you're sitting there trying to process this as a junior, how many people in your class volunteered to serve after 9/11? If just off the top of your head, do you know how many people in your high school class served? Maybe a handful. It wasn't a lot from my school, and I'm not sure what the difference is between one school and another, but it wasn't a lot, I would say. Well, it was a select handful.
Yeah. So why are you different? Why did you?
That was the question that I asked, because I had wanted to go to university and do that whole thing, and honestly, I was a terrible student. And so I did a semester at a school here locally. And wasn't really driven to go to class. I found something that I don't think I fully understood it at the time, and I learned it better after I got out of the military, that go to school, it affects me and only me. At least on the short term, when I go to school, I get grades, and those are my grades, and everything that we do in school, that's me, and it's a reflection of me. And that doesn't drive me. I'm somebody who's driven by being a part of a team. I feel like I'm motivated to be a contributor to a team, and that wasn't occurring in a university. So I wanted to join the team.
So tell me what that was like. How soon after September 11th did you join?
So September 11th, I went in March of 2004. So that'd been a couple of years. It wasn't immediately after. Like I said, I was 16, I think, at the time, 9/11, and so it took a little bit of time. But it was just, to me, it was just a matter of seeing that there was a duty to be done, and then thinking it through about where is my role with that duty, and then it was no question at that point. Once I realized that it was a duty that I owed.
So you felt like it was a duty that you owed.
Yeah. It's like you go through life and you're part of society, and you everybody has to chip in, just like anything else. I see a lot of people that throw trash on the ground, or they don't take any kind of sense of common ownership of things, and for whatever reason, I was driven to, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I was just driven to do my part, and I didn't feel like it would have been right to have not done my part.
Well, where do you think that came from?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that I think I've always been influenced by. I'm not somebody who's easily influenced by others, but there are a few people that I've admired and I've been influenced by them. One was a guy named John Neerman. He was one of the elders of my church growing up, and he was an usher many days. It was a small church, and so everybody kind of had to pitch in and do their roles. And one day, my dad saw him, and the guy was in his 70s. My dad saw him doing some cleanup stuff after service, and said, "You should go help him." And so I helped him, and next thing I knew, I was helping him usher every Sunday, and I don't know, I just love kind of being a part of how things work, and just watching him and how he not only was he a servant and that he was doing his part to make our worship services go well, but he was somebody who did so gladly, and that it was that spirit of glad contribution that just was attractive to me. I just felt like that's kind of who I wanted to be. And ever since then, I've just been fortunate to encounter one person after another whom I would have admired that had a similar sort of sense of duty and glad service.
I mean, did you find, well, I guess, my question was going to be, did you find that in the military? And it seems like you did at some level.
Yeah. I think, so one of the things that you had mentioned while we were in was that you had played on different sports teams, things like that, and you'd been on a championship team or two, and you frequently reminded us that this was a championship team, and maybe we don't see it right away, but in the moment, but you don't get that many opportunities to be part of a team like that, and that was definitely that opportunity. And I got to tell you, and this is maybe a little bit naive on my part, but at the time, there was a part of me that didn't believe it. I kind of felt like we were. I felt like we were the underdogs. We were kind of the dirtbags. You know what I mean? And I couldn't see how good we were. And then once I got out of the military, I went into the National Guard and worked with some guys who had been from other active military units who had also deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and quickly realized that I actually knew a lot about what we were doing. I had a lot of knowledge and experience that other guys didn't have, even though they had been in combat. We had really performed very well, and I didn't realize that until that point.
I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that in a while, but I did believe that when we were at our platoon together, that it just felt like, it didn't feel like this at first, but as we went through our training, it felt like we were a very well-oiled machine. It felt like we just were clicking. And I don't know. Because there were many moments, you're right, like in training where like we would do these live fire exercises and we were just recocked over and and over again because we weren't meeting the standard. And as frustrating as that was at the time, I do think that it made us better. And we didn't blame one another for those failures. We just wanted to get better. And I think ultimately that paid off for us in the long run. But I did feel, and it was just a feeling, even when we were sort of like the bad news bears of 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment, at least in training, I still felt like Outlaw Platoon was special in some way. And I did liken it to playing on a championship sports team. And looking back on my life, I was on very, very few championship sports teams, and thinking back even now, because again, I hadn't thought about what you just said in a long time, but looking back even now, that feeling was there as well, and it's not something that you can put your finger on right away. It's just a feeling that you have, and that feeling is really, really, really rare. And I think it's part of like I'm with a group of very special people right now who all want the same thing that I do, and frankly, in Outlaw Platoon, I don't really know what that was. Probably just to survive when we found ourselves in combat, but a fear of letting each other down. But also, it was about the right group of people. And again, these are people from all different types of backgrounds. who just wanted to win as well. And so I don't, Outlaw Platoon was rare in that regard. And looking back on it, those moments in my life where I've had that intangible feeling in my soul, I feel like those moments are rare. And what I always wanted for you guys was the recognition that, hey, maybe this is kind of a special thing in real, because anytime I played a sport, Rob, I always wanted to know, looking back, I wish I would have recognized how special that was in the moment so I could soak it up, you know?
Yeah. You gotta stop and smell the roses and to have that perspective. It's difficult sometimes when you're in the moment to have that perspective for yourself. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to help you recognize it, but you definitely want to appreciate it because it's easy to, every day you got little things that frustrate you. Your feet are wet, you're cold, you're hungry, whatever. They're things that are very unpleasant being an infantryman, certainly. And just to have the perspective to stop and smell the roses, to say, you know what, this is something that I'm going to remember positively in the future. It may not feel that way right now, but down the road, this is going to be something that I'm going to want to have appreciated more than I do in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's powerful because, and another thing is like taking a stop to smell the roses, but sometimes I feel like it just takes time. I don't know about you. I mean, I a lot of the guys that I've talked to in our platoon years after the deployment, I feel like many of them are just starting to come around to how special our platoon really was.
That's absolutely the case, yeah.
And I don't know what that is or why life is like that sometimes. Why does it take such a long time sometimes to gain that positive perspective on something that was positive in the moment? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's, most of us go through life trying to get through today. And the challenges that each day presents itself can be overwhelming. And, to see the big picture, the forest for the trees, so to speak, it's a challenge. And I think it's a worthwhile challenge. I think it's something that's, it's worthy use of attention and energy, but it doesn't come easy. But I will say that there were guys, sometimes you have an intuition for these things. I feel like you kind of did. And there were guys who, even in our train-up phase before we went to Afghanistan, there were guys who were plucked up because they were very good at what they did. They were plucked up for special units that had for whatever reason, they were able to handpick guys. And so they were picking these guys up and pulling them out of our platoon. And there was a resistance to that. They did not want to do that. We had some guys went to scouts and they didn't want to go and they tried to fight it. And, and even though on a day-to-day basis, we might complain about this or that, or, this leader or that situation or that training model, whatever it is. But then when the time comes that you got to leave, you guys don't want to leave. And I think that's kind of an intuition maybe.
So take me back to your first days in the military and what basic training was like for you. You went to basic training at Fort Benning, right? Because you wanted to be in the infantry?
I did. Yeah.
Tell me what that first day at basic training was like. And did you have a moment where you were like, I immediately regret this decision, or what did I get myself into?
No, I never regretted it. It was just really surreal. And from day one, it was one thing after another that I just would never have expected. These guys would come in with so much baggage. Some guys, it was like somebody had told them they go in the army or they go to jail, and I didn't even realize we were still doing that. That was quite a rude awakening. And, even before anybody was really yelling at us, there were guys that were like distraught and struggling. And, it was just really, really weird. I guess I had a picture of, you watch these movies, Black Hawk Down. That was like 90% of my basic training platoon. If you asked them why they came into the Army, it was Black Hawk Down. So that's some kind of a tremendous recruiting coup for the Army there. But these guys, it's like they're portrayed in the movies as very elite, and you get there and it's like these like scrawny, nerdy guys, and it seems like they've been scraped from the bottom of the barrel. It's kind of like that scene in Platoon where Charlie Sheen talks about the grunt, the guy that's kind of the refuse of every community, and but he's the guy that can take it, that can take whatever's dished out. And So it was just a very surreal experience. And I'm somebody who's always studied history to some degree, and so I have some realization of the gravity of such a situation of going into the military and what it means to wear the uniform. And so the first day putting the uniform on, it was I like imposter syndrome, where you feel like you're not up to it. I kind of felt like that, and obviously, day one of basic training or whatever, you're kind of not, but. It was just a really wild, surreal experience for me.
When you put the uniform on for the first time.
Yeah. Well, because first off, you're trying to make sure you do it right, because it's not always that obvious. What do you do with the little strings that hang down from the bottom of your pants and your boots? Everything is just you want to get it right, and you want to present yourself the right way. And so you're thinking about that, but also how many people came before you that wore that uniform who've done great, legendary things, and that was not lost on me.
Yeah, it had to be a special feeling. I when I go to these military academies and I meet with these cadets, it had to be a special feeling. Putting that. I guess what I'm trying to say is I always wish that I understood in the moment that I was really standing on the shoulders of giants. When I went in the military, Rob, I wanted to do all the cool, sexy stuff. I mean, probably, even myself, because, you see the challenge that was set out before you in a movie like Black Hawk Down, and you half wonder, could I survive that? Could I do that? When it's hitting the fan and bullets are cracking by my head, am I going to have the wherewithal to be able to make decisions to get my people out of there, or fight through to the bitter end, or, say, but also believe the Ranger creed and fighting onto the Ranger objective, though I be the lone survivor? Am I up to that task? And I think that's what, a movie like Black Hawk Down, I mean, that wasn't the sole reason why I joined, but I feel like that movie was woven into the fabric of our generation. Even though I'm a little bit older than you, even people who you said were in your basic training class, it was, oh, wow, Black Hawk Down. Well, Black Hawk Down really is, even though it was about Rangers, it really is a quintessential infantry story, and I just wish I felt the same way that you did and had that perspective of, man, this uniform means something. Yeah, these BDUs, this camouflage, people bled in these before, and they've sacrificed for this country. And you talked about that sense of duty that you had prior to 9/11. Rob, I guess what I'm getting to is that did you have anybody in your life that taught you about that?
Well, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, had fought in World War II. He was an infantryman. He fought with the 1st Infantry Division in Sicily, and he was in the Normandy invasion on the first day, and he was fought through France into Germany. Fought in the Battle of Hurtgen Forest, and he was a legend. And he had these great accomplishments. As a soldier, he was captured at one point by Germans, and then he talked them into surrendering. So he had these great accomplishments and incredible experiences as a soldier, the good and the bad. But he was also somebody as a person who had just tremendous character, and he was somebody that I'm pretty sure everybody in my family has looked up to, and so. Knowing about him, and he didn't talk that much about these things, but you could learn, kind of what's what to some degree, just from knowing what his unit did. Just having somebody like that is an example, let's say, really made an impact on me, and I think made me want to learn if I was capable, if I was up to the task, like what you said, and I think there's a rite of passage that is in most societies around the world where you become an adult, and I think this is especially important for men. We've got to figure out what we're meant to do, what we're capable, what it is that are we equal to the task that is put before us, that so many people before us, so many men before us have been able to do. And to me, that was a lot of it. It was that kind of rite of passage. And I think, sadly, I think that with so few men going into the military these days, I think that our society is lacking that rite of passage, and it's problematic.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to ask you questions about, where we are as a military today a little bit later. So let's put a pin in that for just a second. But you got to tell me, do you know anything else about how your grandfather convinced a bunch of Germans to surrender after he was captured? Did he ever tell you that story?
He didn't, but there was a newspaper article about it, and so he was interviewed, and it's got one of those classic photos of him pointing at the map. This is where it happened, that kind of thing. It was a local newspaper. He came from a very, very small town in upstate New York, and so everybody knew him, and to see this story was obviously incredible for anybody, but. So I think he was a medic, and in those days it was infantryman and medic. Medic was kind of a specialty within the infantry, and like a grenadier or something like that today. And they were back and forth. This is in Hürtgen Forest, I believe, near Aachen, on the border of Germany. And the Germans were preparing for the Battle of the Bulge, so they did not want the Americans to be able to push into their staging area, essentially, near Aachen. And so they were fighting to the last man, essentially. And this is often called the Western Front's meat grinder. We were just throwing wave after wave of guys to go in this fight. And coming back where there was one soldier left in the company, everyone else had died, and so then that soldier is promoted, to a leadership so that they can refill the company and send it back in an hour, that kind of thing, and so it was in this back and forth fighting, and his men had pushed forward, and then they were retreating back from the Germans, and he stopped to treat some wounded, and the Germans basically overtook his position while he was treating these wounded guys, and the Germans at this point kind of knew that the war was over, and the last thing they wanted to do was have to surrender to the Soviets. And so he knew just enough German and had just enough cigarettes to ply them to say, hey, whenever the Americans come back this way, which they will, just turn yourself over. I think there were like 11 of them or something like that. And so he came marching out with a squad of Germans with their hands up, and turn them over to the American authorities. And it's just one of those incredible stories that, that it's hard to imagine yourself in those shoes. And, but he was that kind of person.
After everything that we've been through in combat, and I feel like we've been through pretty much everything, we haven't been through anything like that. That's like a World War II. The crazy stuff happened in World War II. Stories like that, of men truly trapped behind enemy lines, or like their glider got shot down over Normandy and they had to fight back 4 football fields to get with their unit. I mean, these are like some of the craziest stories imaginable. And in fact, I just saw, like, my dad and I were talking about a story that he read, or a tweet that he saw or something, and it was a picture of Ted Williams and Yogi Berra, and it said, just a picture of, a pilot in World War II who flew combat missions and a machine gunner on the beaches of Normandy. And Yogi Berra, obviously the famous New York Yankee. I think Ted Williams was as well. I think he was a Yankee as well. But professional baseball players signed up to go fight, not just like be a part of like the PR, or sell war bonds to the American people. These were guys on the front lines flying combat missions or toting a machine gun. I mean, Isn't that just? Are there differences? Do you see differences between, our generation who served and people who rose up to serve after Pearl Harbor was attacked for World War II?
Well, that's a good question, but I think that fundamentally, no, I don't think we're all that different. I think there are societal influences that are different. There's a great silent era movie called The General, and The General is in reference to a Confederate train, and there was the guy. It was a Buster Keaton movie, and so Buster Keaton was an engineer or conductor, something like that on this train, and so the war starts, and all the men in his little town, the Confederate town, all the men start to enlist to go in the Army and fight because of that sense of duty. And I don't think that's very different from us. He tries to get in. They won't let him because he's so valuable working on the trains are needed for transporting, supplies and things like that for the war. So they wouldn't let him in. And the woman that he was trying to court wouldn't have anything to do with him because he wasn't wearing a uniform. She said, "Come back to me whenever you've got the uniform on." And I think there are still plenty of people who have that hunger to serve, but I think that there are enough who don't, and there are enough who don't understand it, that don't within our society where we don't have that mutual understanding of what duty is. That I think that's where it looks different. We've kind of got this separate class of military people that, maybe often it's a family tradition of military service, but sometimes not. And I think that we've created a separate class. These are the people who go and fight for us, and we just treat them separately. And I think that's a big flaw. So whereas I don't think the individual soldier has that different of a drive, I think our society looks at it in a different way.
Man, that's a great answer. And it's actually got me thinking. It's like so much of who we are today and what our society is all about, like even news culture, celebrity culture, the people that we look at in the news media every day are celebrities in our country. It all tends to be about immediate gratification and building your own platform and making your own money. And, I just feel like, does that play into it? Is that what you're talking about when you refer to different cultural influences that drive us today versus back during World War II?
I think that's a lot of it. Yeah. I think that if you grow up, let's say more of a agrarian society in the 19th century, if you grew up in that and what is your local town, the people around you, I think that you admire people who work hard and who have that strong sense of duty to themselves and to others, to their families. Whereas now, when we have information about anybody around the world, essentially at any time, I think then you start to admire these celebrities, like you said, or even fictional superheroes. You view them as something that you could never be, but it's fun to watch them on the screen. I think that we lose that sense of where we fit within the greater picture. And I think that's really a lot of where that comes from is just losing that kind of local perspective. Where do I fit? And does a hero have to be somebody who does something that puts them in the Wikipedia today, let's say, or can it be somebody who is a mother that just pours everything that she has into caring for her kids, or a father who works every day to make sure that his family's provided for, or somebody who is a fireman and when there's a building that's ablaze, that will run in to do his duty. And those are the people that I think are most worth admiring.
I do think the discussion of what's a hero is so important, and we need to have it, because it's a term that I think is just so overused in our society. And, for me, and this is just, I felt this way for a long time, but as you said, everybody that you just outlined to me, it would be somebody that I consider a hero, but many of those people aren't the ones that are on your TV every day. And are we celebrating the wrong types of heroes in this country?
Yeah, I think that's the case. And some of it, I think, also comes from a misunderstanding about the need. And we've got some really fancy building processes now where houses don't catch fire as easily as they once did, where a whole town would burn down. Or even on the military perspective, there are many people who do not think that there is a wolf at the door. They do not think that our military is necessary to keep the danger away. They've just been so removed from it because of, ironically enough, it's because of those heroes of our past who have eliminated that danger from our immediate vision. That so many people don't realize just how necessary that is, and just how fragile our peace and our prosperity is. I think there are some who do, and those are often the ones who are called to serve. And the others, I think, just see it as, a profession. I think that's, not to get into politics, but that's often where a lot of the political changes in the military have come from lately, where it's all training about, equity and these things that you would never include those things in the military training procedures without if you understand that this is life or death. We're talking about existential threats, and I think because so many people don't see those threats, it's the what's the expression that the sheepdog doesn't concern himself with the opinions of the sheep. The sheep often are not aware of the danger, and on the one hand, you want people to not be frightened every day that the hunt is coming through your village, but on the other hand, I think we've removed ourselves from the reality of the situation, which is that indeed what we have is very fragile, and we need people who are willing to go and to assault the breach to keep us safe.
As you were talking, I couldn't help but think of Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. Like when he's sitting on the bench, he's like, "You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall, but you don't want to sully your hands with any of the actual work that it takes to defend this country." And it is actually a really interesting point that you make, Rob, because I always refer to this as the double-edged sword of living in a very free and prosperous society, where the mission of parents like me or one generation to the next is like, almost every fiber of my being, I ask myself with every fiber of my being every day of what can I do to make sure that my kids inherit a better, easier life than me? Isn't that the duty, essentially? Maybe not an easier life, but you want your kids to live in a country that was better than the one that you had. Nobody raises kids and says, "Man, I hope these kids inherit a country that's complete crap." No one says that. So from World War II, these guys sacrificed so much. Any conflict that America had prior to World War II, it's not simply not relegating it to World War II, but even like every generation since then, parents have asked that question of the next generation. And I think by and large, they've accomplished that mission. Obviously there were some valleys along the way, but we've always, I feel like we, as Americans, the next generation has it just a little bit easier. And are we at a point now in our country, Rob, where, I know I felt like this, but where people just don't know what the truth that we really even live in a free country. They think that what we have here is everywhere. And I think, I think of Ronald Reagan and what he said often, that the last bastion of freedom in the world is the United States of America. There is nowhere else. And he's right. He's right. You can't go to Australia or Europe or essentially anywhere in China or the Middle East, Russia, obviously, but America is it, where you can go from a kid that grew up in a middle income family like me to being wounded in combat, having nothing when you come out, to getting calls from the president of the United States. That's my personal story, but this country affords us unlimited opportunity if you're just willing to see it and seize upon it. It does not mean that you'll be successful, and I've certainly failed a hell of a lot more than I've succeeded in this life, but I like having the freedom to take the shot. And are we just at a point now in our country where people just don't recognize it because they've inherited such a free, prosperous, and easy life?
Absolutely. I definitely believe that. And if you look at the Old Testament in the Bible, there's so many instances where people have become complacent, or whatever you want to call it. The Israelites were freed from bondage in Egypt, and they immediately wanted to go back. They couldn't handle the difficulties of the wilderness, and I think when people want to have a king, they want to have somebody who just makes things better for them. They don't want to do, because the kind of liberty you're talking about comes with responsibility. They go hand in hand. And so we've had this tremendous amount of liberty in the United States. And now as that liberty has created prosperity, I think people, they want to give up their liberty in order to just be comfortable. And, it was a little bit of a shock to me to see during the COVID lockdowns, and to see that I think it was Sweden that didn't do any kind of the draconian lockdown stuff that we did, and to compare us to Sweden, that Sweden would be more free than us is really quite a shock, I have to say. But I think that we do have institutions that can help us to recover some of the sense of personal responsibility that we maybe once had as a society. Our military is the only institution in the U.S. that has for hundreds of years been built on a chain of successes and failures on the battlefield, so that when you were being trained by guys who probably had fought in Vietnam, or at least had been trained by guys who had fought in Vietnam, and then those guys have been trained by soldiers who had fought in the Korean conflict, and so forth and so on, going all the way back. That chain is an unbroken chain of success and failure for hundreds of years, and there's nothing else. There's no private company that's been like that. There is no other institution, maybe outside of the church, that has that kind of history, and so we have an opportunity, I feel, by taking some of the lessons from that institution, to see that, to have the perspective to see that that it is fragile, and that our liberty is worth the hardships that come with it.
I mean, but are we living up to it, Rob? I mean, I have, by the way, if you've watched the podcast, I don't give a shit about getting into politics. We can do that all day long. I mean, but I initially intended to talk more deeply about your story, but the conversation's going where it's going, so let's just keep going with it. But I feel like the Pentagon, a few years ago, had a study about the type of person that serves. Like, where are we drawing this bucket of people from in the country? And one of the most telling elements of the study was that the military, by and large, is a legacy organization, the all-volunteer force. Like, people join the military because a parent had joined, or a grandparent, and they saw that service, not dissimilar to your life experience, but they saw that service and they joined themselves. And what we're seeing today, for the first time in American history, and it's different than what it was in the Vietnam War, because there were recruiting challenges after the Vietnam War, because of course there was. But what we're seeing today is veterans, by and large, who fought for 20 years, Iraq, Afghanistan, other contingency operations elsewhere. Their kids are, coming of age, 14, 15 years old. I've experienced this with my own children, and where they ask, "What do you think about me serving?" And my response is, no.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'll tell everybody that's watching or listening, ultimately it's their decision. And I mean, I will 100% support whatever they decide to do, but I see what's happening to our military every day, and even all the challenges that our military faced after the Vietnam War, and how just political that war was, and how the politicians lost the Vietnam War despite Americans winning every ground battle in that war. Politicians were the ones that lost it. Obviously, Vietnam was a hyper political environment. But what I'm seeing today that concerns the hell out of me is the military becoming a political entity. And a good example of this is, when they had a vaccine mandate in the military for the COVID vaccine. Now, by the way, I might have a perspective that surprises some people on vaccine mandates in the military. I mean, do you remember how they mandate a smallpox vaccine for us? I still have the scar on my shoulder for smallpox. They were trying to mandate the anthrax vaccine. Did you get the anthrax vaccine? You probably did.
I got whatever they gave me, man.
Well, that's exactly right. Like, they mandate these crazy vaccines for you, and you don't have a say because you're just a GI, and a GI means government issues. So you're owned by the government. So, but nevertheless, I couldn't help but feel, just because this is how cultural Marxists think, that by imposing a draconian vaccine mandate on our troops, and even removing all religious exemptions from that, because we saw that, you were weeding out the more conservative service members who can think for themselves, and having basically what was left, a far left military force that was more ideologically similar to Joe Biden's politics. That concerns the hell out of me. That worries the hell out of me. And I think you're seeing, after that, Rob, all this stuff that you just talked about, all this woke bullshit that they're weaving in our military. They're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, Secretary of Defense Austin just came out and, talked about trans people being in the military. And what I always say to this, Rob, is that, like, if you're there, you're serving, you're in a trench, you're in combat with Outlaw Platoon. I did not care what your politics were. I did not care what God you worshiped or what color your skin was or whether you were gay or straight. None of that mattered at all. But it was because we were trained to be a collective unit together that we weren't to focus on our differences, of which there were many. But it was the unity beyond those many differences that really made us a lethal fighting force. And so I'm concerned today that our military is just like everyone's focused like on their differences. Like you see these people out there filming these selfie videos about how like, I'm LGBTQ, LMNOP community, and like we're proud to serve. Like that's fine. Like I don't care. You're over 18. You're entitled to live the life that you want, but that's not what our military is about. Right. And our leadership, like the question through which they should make decisions on whether or not we pursue diversity, equity, inclusion programs, things like that should be, does this make our military more lethal or not? Will this help us accomplish the mission, first of all? But then you take a step back and you think about, Rob, even from there, well, the left, they like twist words. So what they'll do with something like that is to say, well, of course, being more diverse and, embracing LGBTQ, LMNOP community makes us a more lethal fighting force. But it doesn't, because that's not what our mission is. That's not what we do. That's not what makes our military strong. So it's the unity beyond all that makes us strong. So I could go on for hours. What do you think about all this?
Well, I think it's not a coincidence that these kinds of divisions, and they're very obvious. Anybody who's paying attention can see that there are people who are getting out of the military, who've been in for a long time. They say it's just not the way it was. And every generation does that, by the way. Every generation says, it's not the way it was when I was a boy, as they get older. But this is not that. This is a very rapid change, and it's not a coincidence that these things are occurring in the military at the same time that you're seeing protests in the NFL and things like that, where these players are it's like you're with us or against us kind of stuff, and that kind of division is very deliberate. It's obviously there are examples of this in the Bolshevik Revolution and other communist movements around the world throughout history, and fascist. This is how you weed out the people that don't meet your ideology, and it's a very rapid change, and it's very real change. And I still see these guys who are going in that they're exactly the kinds of people you would want in the military, and they're so driven by a sense of duty and sense of patriotism. I meet guys who have read your book, Outlaw Platoon, and they're so fired up about it that they get me to a recruiter as soon as possible. They want to go in and they want to do their part, and they're still out there, and there are a lot of them. And I think that we have to keep our eyes on those types. And if things were being done right, I think you would see senior, general officers dropping like flies because they refuse to be a part of this stuff, because they know that they're actually putting men into danger. But I think that we've got a really, really weak senior leadership in all of our military branches, and they go along to get along, and that will never ever serve someone in a life or death situation. Go along to get along, abandon your principles just to get the next rank or whatever it is. It's not a winning solution.
You are so right. And you and I talked about this a lot when we were in, right? Do you remember how often I was getting in trouble as a platoon leader? Do you remember that? And you said something to me I don't know, I think when I got to the unit, you were a PFC, or I don't know. Were you a PFC and did I promote you to specialist? I don't remember.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, that's right.
And then you became a corporal, non-commissioned officer, young non-commissioned officer, and team leader. Did you ever make E5 when you were in with me or not?
No, and I'll tell you why. Here's my bitterness to come out.
Okay.
That was the retention move at the time. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember. Yes, of course I do. Yeah.
So I had about a year left in the Army, and I was promoted to corporal, but they wouldn't give me an E5 promotion unless I reenlisted, and they were very specific about that. You reenlist, we'll promote you to E5. They even did with one of the guys, I won't mention his name. He was a E5 serving in a squad leader role, so he was serving as an E6, a staff sergeant, and we did a whole ceremony to promote him. They pinned it on.
I remember.
And then right after, the first sergeant said, "Hey, so you're going to reenlist now, right?" He said, "No, first sergeant." He said, "Well, you can't keep that rank because you don't have enough time in service." And so they demoted him, and that's I have a lot more respect for the first sergeant now than I did as a young soldier, because soldiers just complain about everything. And I see a lot of where the first sergeant was very, very wise, but that was not a good move. And so for me as a corporal, that was I was just stuck as a corporal for a year, and then I went to the National Guard for 2 years after I got out of the Army. Their line was 2 years retention. Well, I had 2 years from day one. So they were like, "You got to reenlist. We'll promote you." And I said, "I'm not going to reenlist. I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game." Did you ever see the movie No Country for Old Men?
Yes.
So for anybody listening, if you haven't seen it, there might be a spoiler here coming. So maybe skip ahead 20 seconds. But there's a hitman that is essentially a serial killer for hire. And one of the things he does is he flips a coin before he kills somebody, and then they're supposed to call it, and then depending on how it comes up, he kills them or he doesn't kill them. And at the end of the movie, there's a woman who basically refuses to call it. She's like, "There is no coin. It's just you. You make the choice. There is no coin." So she refuses to play a stupid game, and that's how I view it, man. It's like I'm not playing their stupid political games, not that, and that's just kind of a stupid little Army thing. But I won't play their games with the COVID stuff, the vaccines, any of that stuff. It's a game that they're playing. They have this specific language, and if you pay very close attention, there are words that are being used now that weren't used before. Climate change would be one of them. It was called global warming before, and then they call it climate change because who could be against? Because climate change is inevitable. So that's the game they play, and I won't say it. I won't use their language. Sorry, I'm not on a tangent.
No, you're not on a tangent. This is why I love you, man. You are one of a kind. I mean, it's true, and I agree with everything that you're saying. So in your comparison, the Army is the serial killer hitman.
The serial killer, yeah. And they said, yeah, exactly. They said, call it in the air, and if you reenlist, then we'll promote.
Join up, kids. The Army's great.
But really though, I mean, it is a unique institution. Like I said, I see guys every day going into the military who are exactly the kinds of guys you would want next to you in a fighting position, and there's a lot of them, and I think that. I don't know that there's an easy solution, but I think that as long as we can encourage those and then give them a platform, and that's kind of something that I try to do in my own life now, is to give a platform to those kinds of guys, the ones that are exactly the ones you want to be leaders, who won't cave on their principles, who are committed to duty, who are committed to doing the right thing, and to give them a platform so that they don't think of themselves as part of a ragtag group of whatever you want to call it, but that they see that they have so much to offer, and that their military experience is valuable, and that there's some new purpose for them after they leave service.
Well, and I mean, really, I was joking around with you about the Army being a serial killer, but your point is well taken in that if the soldier that you were talking about that we promoted to E6 and then we took the rank because he wouldn't re-enlist, what you're saying is the Army should recognize my leadership and promote me regardless, and hope that because they see a leader in me that I will make the choice to stay on my own. It's not like it's like if you see leadership potential in me, then why not just promote me based on merit? Why manipulate the system and say, we'll promote you, because maybe we see leadership in you, maybe we don't, but we'll promote you if you just stay in and sign on the dotted line for another 4. That doesn't seem... That seems disingenuous. Yeah,
it's disingenuous and it's adversarial. It's us versus you, and if we can trick you into staying, then you're going to stay. But who wants somebody to stay that you had to trick into staying, or that you had to manipulate them in some way to stay? Why would you want them to stay? Why not, like you said, on the merits of the thing itself? Why not sell exactly what it is and to have them there willingly because they want to be part of the team?
Do you think people would choose to stay on their own?
People do it. They do it. They do it every day. And, the way the military is now, and I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, but they've eliminated the pension, which was a big factor that kept a lot of guys. They wanted to stay for a pension. So I guess we're going to see. Who's going to stay, because I don't know where they're going to get these senior ranks filled.
Wait, they eliminated the pension? What do you mean they eliminated the pension? If you get retired, you do your 20, you don't get retirement pay?
No, it's something more akin to a 401k now. So there is no, they had guys who were grandfathered in. So the guys we know who are still in, they'll still get their pension. But after a certain year, if they joined the military after a certain year, they won't get a pension. So I don't know how they're going to retain guys for the long term, but I mean, we're going to see,
I did not know this. I mean, that strikes me. That's very, very concerning to me, because a lot of guys will get in. I mean, they get in because they're in a recruiter's office, or they're in the ROTC program because they feel a sense of duty, and they're there because they want to be there. But if you're a 20-something kid and you're looking to join the military, one of the things that you look at is that, okay, if I do my 20, I'll be 38, 39, 40, and have the option to retire and have that pension and then go work another job. And the reason why that's important is because, when I was a young lieutenant, I had a ton of responsibility, 40 infantry soldiers underneath me, which is basically the size of a mid-sized business, and you're the CEO of that company. And I was making like 40 grand a year, and privates make half of that. 18 grand. So you're spending 20 years of your life and really not making a wage that can sustain a family until, if you're an officer, probably an 03. If you're enlisted, I don't know, E6, E7 is where you're actually making money that is commensurate with your rank and your authority. But even then, you're not making a ton. And so my point is, and this is why, the VA, a lot of people don't even understand why we get VA loans, which is a guaranteed loan of a guaranteed mortgage, because we spent 20 years of our life serving our country, making almost nothing, Right. And so where everybody else who decided not to serve, they're out moving and shaking and hustling if they're doing it right, and climbing a corporate ladder and making a ton of money and investing at places. Well, you don't have that option when you're in the military, because the operational tempo is so high. When we were deploying year on, year off, year on, year off. I mean, how much investing can you do? How much saving can you do? Can you really raise a family effectively? You put all of that on hold. And if you do your 20, you'll get your pension, and then you can start doing all that. But when you get out, when you're 38, you're way behind the people who joined when they were 20 something. And so if you remove that, what are you going to get? A bunch of kids and young officers who stay in for 4 and get out because there's no reason to sacrifice 20 years of your life and be behind your peers by 20 years. And there's no reason to do it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's also physical considerations. You saw guys that had been in for 20 years in the infantry, and they're aging in dog years. It's like,
my God, it's so true.
It's a beating, and I can't even imagine what kind of specimen could stay for 20, 30 years. Without sustaining injuries that are seriously debilitating injuries, and when you don't have a pension to look forward to be able to retire and rest your weary bones, I don't know how that's going to look.
I mean, and that's another great point, another great consideration, and yeah, that concerns me. So you have, legacy military families who aren't joining. Kids aren't joining today for the first time ever. Then you have this woke ideology, which I don't really like using the term woke because it's too vague, but you have this what seems to be a pervasive, what is clearly a political ideology woven into the fabric of many of the policies of the military moving forward. And then you have something like this, which is really like a pragmatic thing for, a pillar of the decision-making process of why someone who would want to join. They you remove that, and the military wonders why there's this massive crisis right now of being able to recruit. I mean, this is a grave national security threat, especially on the heels of the conversation that we just had. The fact that the wolf is at the door all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This country faces threats. And if we don't have the biggest, baddest military on the block, how do we protect and defend against those threats?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard to not feel like it's deliberate sometimes. But I feel like in many ways we're going the wrong direction.
So we've already done an hour. So what I'd like to do, Rob, if you're cool with it, is bring you back for a part 2. And that time, I really, really want to focus on your story. You put that uniform on in basic training for the first time, and I want to talk about your training, what you learned as a young leader, and I want to talk about your experience in combat and how that shaped you. And I also want to talk about on part 2 and where you are now. Is that okay with you? Can I bring you back to recording a part 2?
Let's do it.
All right, so stand by for just a second. Everybody else is just watching. You just heard it. We're going to have a part 2. Again, Rob Pinholt is an amazing guy with tons of great life lessons that you can learn just by watching and listening to the guy. He's experienced just so much in his young life. But stand by for part 2. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Never quit. Never surrender. That's what this podcast is all about. Subscribe to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to my Rumble channel. We need your help. As always, God bless you all, and God bless this amazing country that we live in. See you for part 2. Take care.